Hello, everyone. Good day. Thank you for joining us with our presentation with our partners over at DynamicPoint. So we are going to take a look at their AP automation solution as it works with Dynamics 365 Business Central. DynamicPoint does offer quite a few applications, so we are just focusing on this one for today. So my name is Jonathan Kroll. I am the Business Central product lead for sa.global Americas. And then we also have Andrew Teskey on our team joining. And then the star of our show is going to be Mr. Mike from DynamicPoint. So I will hand that over to you, Mike.
Thank you, Jonathan. I don't know about star, but we'll see what we could do. And I appreciate you giving us the opportunity to talk. Today's session, as we introduced here, is talking about AP automation, specifically using Office 365. So we're going to spend most of the meeting going through that, and then we're going to end it with how you could also extend that using a vendor portal. So I'm going to go ahead and focus on my screen here and kill my camera. Just wanted to say hi. Go ahead and drop that and focus on our presentation. So today we are going to be talking about our Easy AP 365 product, right? And as you probably figured out, the whole intent of this product is essentially leveraging Office 365 to offer more functionality for hopefully a better price by leveraging what you already own. That's the whole intent of this. So the Office 365 product, or I'm sorry, the Easy AP product is entirely built within this ecosystem that Microsoft provides us. So we're using all the Office 365 tools, we're using the workflow, we're using SharePoint as a document storage, and we're trying to use all these components such that we could provide a solution for you that will, like I said, will use what you already own, and then hopefully the goal here is to give you a more flexible product for a cheaper price because we are using what you already own. The components that go into that from an AP automation perspective, there's really, I like to summarize it into 4 big areas from AP automation. One is the ERP integration aspect, and obviously this system has to tie in with the ERP product. In this case, we'll be focusing on Business Central, but we have integration with other products as well. The other is, of course, it has to serve as a repository. I have to store this data somewhere. Invoices have to come in. These are invoices that are going to be coming in from my vendors, right? That's the topic for today. How do I take these vendor invoices and what do I do to organize them and process them? How do I leverage OCR, right? And using optical character recognition technology to extrapolate what I need from that otherwise PDF or paper invoice, and then the workflow component. And really what you see on this next pie chart over here is so much of this functionality is already available to Office 365 subscribers, right? An invoice repository, SharePoint is a great foundation for that. SharePoint is not only the foundation for document storage from a general Microsoft perspective, but other apps such as Teams and OneDrive use SharePoint as their document repository as well. The other one, the workflow, Power Automate, previously known as Microsoft Flow, is a great workflow tool that we could leverage for routing invoices for review and approval and obtaining that delegation of authority and who needs to see what based on vendor or the threshold, et cetera, of that invoice, as well as in OCR. So there's various OCR solutions out there. Microsoft provides their AI Builder, which has native OCR capability for receiving invoices and extrapolating the data that I need out of them. So as you can see, a lot of this is technology that's already available and already at your fingertips if you're an Office 365 subscriber. Oops, I'm sorry, I missed a couple slides here. So, oh, there we go. Quick talk about our product portfolio. Make sure, oh, I'm sorry, I missed one. Let's do one more. So just a little bit about us and DynamicPoint and what it is that we do. So we've been around since 2009, and our products are all created on the Office 365 framework, which you've probably figured out. We have a little bit of history before us. We used to create custom apps and then on-premise SharePoint products back in the day, before Office 365 was even around, and now all of our products are built on this Office 365 framework. So that's just a little bit of history on us. a little bit about our product portfolio. We're going to be featuring the two on the left. We're going to talk a little bit about our portal product that'll enable a vendor portal. We'll touch on that at the end. Most of our focus will be on this product right here, which is our AP automation product. Again, the intent of this application is going to be taking everything from the point of an invoice coming in from the vendor, workflow, the use of OCR, what we call AP management, which includes both PO and non-PO invoices, and then ultimately bringing this in as an invoice to Business Central ready to be posted and paid. And then the last product you see here is an employee expense management product. We're actually going to skip this one for the sake of today. So that'll be our focus for today's webinar. Again, a little bit more about these technologies of Office 365 that I introduced and how they're working together to provide an AP automation platform using this Office 365 framework. So I like to say we're sort of a piece of this pie, if you will, right? Because you can see there's a lot of different technologies coming into play, and we're on the leftmost side here, and really what our product is doing is offering the integration and the functional aspects of, or the accounting aspects, I should say, of AP automation, PO matching, non-PO matching, account assignment, templates, and things like that. The data repository and where all my information is being stored and my invoices are coming into is provided by SharePoint. So in addition, SharePoint's providing the security, the branding, the document management, and in general, you could see it's really the framework for this whole process. It's the home, it's where the app is deployed, it's where I'm going to go look at statuses and everything else. So it's really the user interface if you think about it from that perspective. Moving forward, you see Power Automate. That's the workflow tool of choice here. Power Automate is going to route invoices for approval. It's going to look at POs and apply thresholds and things of that nature. It is the automation and the business logic behind this whole solution that we're going to discuss. Other things I could do, depending on how I'm capturing invoices from vendors, I could use forms, I could use Power Apps and sort of extend this process, again, using just different aspects of the Office 365 suite, depending on what my business process is. If I'm in like a distributed buying environment and I want buyers, or I should say people in the field, to submit check requests, I could simply create them a form. We'll show you some examples of that, of how I could have a form come in and bring data directly into an invoice automation process. Or if I need something more sophisticated, I could give them an app on their phone as well. And the last thing tying all of this together is Power BI. Again, all of the data is being stored over here in SharePoint. So if I want to begin developing reports and things of that nature, I have Power BI at my fingertips. I can natively connect to this data and begin, creating dashboards and developing analytics. And we'll show some examples of that as well. So that was it from an introduction process on who we are and what it is that we do and how this is all going to work together. And now I'm going to dive more into the AP automation process. And then of course, we'll go look at that and see what that means. AP automation in general, I like to simplify it in sort of three major steps, right? The first step is an invoice has to be received. Like, no kidding, right? If I'm going to process an invoice from a vendor, I have to get it. And ultimately, what that means for us is this invoice is going to come into a library, right? So I've heard this, library called a queue. I've heard it called a collection device. People call it a garbage disposal, whatever we want to call it. This is what we're going to monitor for all invoices that are coming into the system. Now, how do I get an invoice from a vendor into this library? And there's a lot of options there. That's a pretty tricky question because Office 365 gives me a lot of flexibility. The most common one that we see from a business perspective is email, right? I have an AP inbox, a vendor is going to send an email to it, and I want that inbox to be monitored such that all invoices going into it are automatically processed. And that's absolutely fine, right? That's a common scenario. Others that we've already introduced is the concept of a check request. Invoices are going to go to people in the business, maybe managers who requested this service, maybe cost center owners, and they need to submit that invoice to accounts payable. Could they email it, just forward the email to me? They could, of course, right? Like they could just send it. The concept of a check request, though, is now I could require them to give me more information as opposed to them just sending me an email saying, hey, can you please pay this? And then I have to go back and forth and say, what the heck is this for? Can you give me some more information? If I give them a check request process, I can now adhere to a more standard process of what I need from an accounts payable perspective to take that invoice and submit it for processing. If I receive invoices mobile, right? Maybe I'm out running around and I'm getting invoices, or employees are buying things and they want to submit those for reimbursement. I could use this concept of a mobile upload to also submit things to a library. Maybe I want to give my vendors a portal and have them submit their own. Maybe I receive them on paper. Maybe I want to scan them in or drag and drop them. All of those are just native aspects of how I can interface with a SharePoint library and use that as a collection device for incoming invoices. So now that I have it, great, what am I gonna do with it, right? I'm obviously gonna process this, and a lot goes on in this step, so obviously I'm simplifying here, but this is where OCR is going to be initialized, and I'm gonna extrapolate data. This is where our app is gonna come into play, and it's gonna look at like purchase orders and do matching or assign accounts based on the vendor and things like that. This is where sort of the accounting aspect comes in, as well as the workflow. Maybe I need to route this for review and approval. Maybe if it's for a PO and it's within a given threshold, I don't need an approval. So I need an automation tool to apply the logic here of what's going to occur and how I need to route this now that I've received it and used OCR to extrapolate data from it. And then the last but not least is the accounting integration, right? This transaction is going to come in. Ultimately, I want to create this purchase invoice in the world of Business Central or whatever ERP I'm using, and that's where the invoice is going to be passed off. All of the data that's collected, of course, from a GL account assignment or a PO matched is going to be automatically integrated. We're going to leverage the web services there and create that transaction in real time. So that's the last and final step. So you could really look at this process and say it's really applied to everything from the point that the invoice comes in to the point that I'm ready to actually enter it, post it, and pay it in the world of BC. Okay, the different personas, I have to be several different people today. So just to sort of set the stage, I'm gonna jump around a little bit, but it can make it confusing, but I'll try to introduce who I am in this process before I actually demonstrate it. I have to be a vendor, right? I need to submit these invoices. What does a vendor care about? Getting paid, right? They don't want it to be complex, they want it to be simple, and they want to get their invoice in and process. That's their whole real goal in life is, show me the money. Accounts payable, they're going to be the other big player and probably the biggest one in this. They worry about managing this process, the efficiency, the coding, looking at all invoices, who's not approving what, who do I need to follow up with, etc. They want the oversight of it. And then the last but not least player in this demo is the manager, right? They have to review their invoices. They're just concerned with productivity. This is not their full-time job, and they want it to be as easy and quick as possible. So I will try to introduce who I am as I'm going through this so we keep it clear. Obviously, I have to be everyone today, but I'll do my best to keep that separate. Okay, so let's get out of this and let's go ahead and go to our AP processing dashboard. And I'm going to do a little bit of introduction on this site, and then we'll step right into the process. So this is the AP processing dashboard. As you guys have probably all seen in your life, this is a SharePoint site. It's really all it is. The only thing that makes this site different than any other SharePoint site in this world is our app has been added to it. So, just like I could add lists and other content to SharePoint, I could add an app, and you can see our AP automation app has been added to this site. So the look and feel is really up to you on what I want this site to look like. For us, I've basically organized it using those 3 steps. So this is invoices coming into the system, which I'll show you. This is my processing queue. This is just a link to Business Central to show those that have already integrated. And then I have some Power BI reports here just showing me some KPI high-level information, unapproved invoices by vendor total, as well as a quick snapshot of aging. Again, data is residing in SharePoint. I could develop these to my heart's content to how I want to show this information that's in the system. So we're going to stop through those 3 steps. Again, just let you know what we're talking about and keep us all on. I'm talking about this slide right here. We're going to go through the receipt, the workflow, and then the integration. So I have to be a vendor, right? So I'm gonna put on my vendor hat and submit some invoices to be processed. And I've prepared an email here. And as you can see, it's going to an ap@dynamicpoint.com. That happens to be my shared inbox, of which is going to collect these invoices for processing. So the vendor's job is really to give me the invoice, and I have attached several here just so I have several to play with. So, I have different invoices, some PO, some non-PO, etc. And we're gonna go ahead and send it. So really that's what I want the vendor to do, right? To email the invoice such that I could electronically process it. If they don't email it and they give me paper, we'll talk about that in a second, but of course we're gonna follow through this example and then we could talk about alternatives. So I'm gonna go into this incoming invoices library. And this library, no one is hanging out here, by the way, but what I wanna show is this is the capture device for all those invoices that I have coming into the system. So if you could see there, I just refreshed and all those invoices that were submitted to my inbox were captured now in this library, right? And what's occurring in the background is after I get all these invoices, OCR is being performed on them. And what you're gonna see here in a brief second is all of these columns that are otherwise blank with who it's from, the subject, the invoice number, the amount, the date, are gonna start getting the data from OCR and be populated with that information. And the reason I'm showing you this is so you understand how it works, right? No one is really quote unquote hanging out waiting for this to happen, or at least I hope not. But you could see how I could use this in other applications and how flexible of a solution this can become. So sometimes my OCR works really quick and other times it takes a minute or two. So sometimes I refresh and it's automatically there and other times I'm refreshing like a madman. But what we will see here shortly is all of these columns start getting data. And if it takes too long, I could keep going, but it's usually pretty quick. Okay, so here we go, right? You can see the results of OCR coming in. All of that data came in. And then what you're gonna see is these invoices are gonna magically start disappearing on me. And the reason that they're disappearing is because they're gonna be, basically brought into the application and then sent through the processing workflow. So the reason, this part really isn't that quote unquote sexy by any means, but the reason I show you this is because I'm gonna focus on that first step a little bit more and talk about the different ways I could capture an invoice. That was an email coming in, but this is just a SharePoint library. And if you have any knowledge of, sort of the flexibility of SharePoint libraries, I could capture an invoice and put it in here in so many different ways. I could scan to it, I could drag and drop to it. Let's say that I want to go with this check request process and give people within my organization the ability to submit a check request, right? And a check request, if you think about it, it's really just an invoice coming as opposed to coming directly from the vendor. It's coming from someone within my company. But the idea of a check request is I can now get more data from them that maybe I wouldn't just have if they forwarded me the email. Right, so in this case, I prepared a simple form for the sake of demonstration of what I want them to fill out on this check request form. And if you guys are all familiar with Microsoft Forms, in fact, it says right here at the bottom, this is just a Microsoft form. But maybe I could get them to populate like a cost center for me or a invoice amount or an ID or a justification for this, etc. And then they're gonna, of course, upload this invoice that they want to submit. So we'll go ahead and pick an invoice here and say, please pay ASAP. Not that they would ever say that to you. And then submit it. So where do we think this form is going to go? It's going to go into that same location. It's actually going to go into that same inbox. And again, if I sit here and refresh, boom, there it is. We've captured that check request in this library because of course it was just a Microsoft form, which also have integration with libraries. And I can now take this as an invoice and pick it up. So it doesn't quote unquote matter how the invoice is getting here. We can automate the processing of it once it gets there by using a monitoring feature on this library. So that was option 2, right? We talked about email, now we talked about check request. What if I want to do that same idea, but I want to give it to my vendors to fill out, right? And I want to put a website form on my website. So this is the same idea as a check request, but maybe a little bit more vendor friendly, and they could go through and populate all these details and specify their PO and upload their file and then submit it directly from here. It will also go in that library, right? Again, just different ways to capture it. Maybe, my organization is more team centric and I want to upload that invoice from Teams, right? Same idea, same library. Teams has integration with SharePoint. So if I go in here and pick this, go ahead and pick that invoice, and now it's going to go ahead and process it, right? That's all it took. All I did was, either drag and drop it or upload it in there, and then that invoice will also be processed in the same way that the email one, the same way that check request was. I'll give you a couple more options, and then after we beat that guy to death, we'll move on to the next step. What about mobile? Right? So I have different scenarios for mobile that we've seen over the years, right? And I think probably the most entertaining one that I was able to find was a farm that we worked with. And the farm, it was actually a pretty large farm, but they were out buying things for their farm, of course, like fertilizer and whatever you need to grow crops, right? Seed, things like that. And people were receiving invoices and they actually wanted to submit them from their phone, right? So I'm, cruising around in my truck and I want to go ahead and say, I just incurred this expense and I want to have this uploaded to the AP process. So we've created a simple Power App for them, right? You can see this is pretty basic Power App here that I could go ahead and create a new invoice. Say that I happened to buy some fertilizer, and this was me, Mike. And then they pick fields, right? And as you can see, these are all, farm centric of what they're growing, sugar beets and potatoes and stuff like that. But little did they know it, the person who was picking all this stuff was ultimately assigning the dimensions in the world of Business Central. So by them picking these things, they were really filling out the data that I ultimately needed to code this invoice when it got approved. And then of course they would take a picture of it. So I'm gonna go ahead and take a photo of one I have up on my screen. And voila, go ahead and submit it. We'll go ahead and save. So that's it, right? Interesting idea that they were using the mobile functionality as essential, as a Power App, as essentially a check request such that they don't have to be in front of a computer and they could do it all from their phone. If I went back to that library and started refreshing again, you would see that data come in and then it would disappear, which I think we probably beat that one up enough, so I don't want to put anyone to sleep with continuing to throw different things into that library. So we'll move on. So all of those things, again, just going back to my slide to keep myself on track here, we're talking about this invoice receipt. And the persona that I was really concerned with is I sort of introduced them as a vendor, but they don't really have to be a vendor who's submitting it, right? It could be an end employee, it could be a contractor, whoever's submitting these invoices, I'm giving them different options on how I want to capture this data. And now we're going to move to step 2. And step 2 is the processing of these invoices. And from a persona perspective, it's going to be more of this world of accounts payable because they're the person who's going to have to take all this information that was just submitted and start making sense of it. So I'm going to put on my AP hat now, get out of that, and then go again back to our, let's close out these just to make sure I'm keeping myself clean here. And let's go back to this dashboard. So now I'm going to go to step 2. So as you can see, my icons here basically, or my images, I should say, correspond to those 3 steps as well. So those are invoices coming into the system. And now I'm going to go into this processing queue. And I'm going to introduce this processing queue being the primary concern of, accounts payable. And what you're gonna see here is all these invoices that I've just submitted are coming in this auto-created status, right? So this is really my dashboard to monitor all of the things that have been submitted, regardless of how they were submitted, check request, email, scan, whatever. And what I'm gonna see in this dashboard is a lot of things, quote unquote, happened when that invoice, from the time that that invoice was submitted to when it was created here. What we're gonna see is, in some cases, I have allocation accounts here entered, right? So this one has been distributed to an account as well as different dimensions and things like that, and that occurred automatically for me using a concept of templates that we have in the system. I could, of course, see the invoice itself, right? So I could see the invoice that was submitted regardless of how it came in. I could see the results of OCR, right? So this captured the number, the date, the amount, etc., of whatever was determined from the OCR process. I probably also have some PO examples I could show you here as well. PO invoices come in a little bit different as opposed to adding GL accounts. We match to the PO that exists in VC. So in this case, the items look a little bit different. They're not assigning GL accounts and distributions because those have already, GL accounts and dimensions, those have already occurred on the PO, and instead the invoice is matching the PO. So that's why you see a little bit of difference here in a PO invoices versus a non-PO invoice. Other stuff you could see going on in this dashboard is I have some validation here. If you put on your glasses and read that, you could see that it's complaining that this invoice already exists. And what the application is doing is searching both BC as well as everything that exists in itself or the product itself to say, has this vendor already submitted this invoice? As you probably figured out, I submit a lot of them from the same vendor. And we're gonna go ahead and update this guy to be unique. I'll just use today's date. I'm gonna go ahead and update the date on that too and save it. And as you can see, it's gonna requery the world of VC and I should see that validation message hopefully go away if everything's great. Yep, it's gone, right? So now it's happy because it's now unique. So as I introduced, this is accounts payable sort of monitoring all of these invoices coming into the system. And then ultimately what I'm gonna do is say, hey, this looks good to go, and I'm gonna submit it for a workflow process. Submitting it is going to kick off an approval process that is going to run using Microsoft's workflow, AKA Power Automate, right? And it's going to look at different factors that I have configured here. I have a whole approval matrix set up in this system that's going to look at the departments and things like that that's assigned and assign it to department reviewers based on dollar thresholds. Do I need to review all these before I submit them for workflow? The short answer is no, right? I can have my workflow be submitted automatically if I chose to do so. It makes my demo go really quick. So I need to slow things down and allow them to come in and then give me as an accounts payable person the ability to sort of review them and then submit them. But note that review is not required. A lot of people like it because you could come in here, edit things, maybe change distributions. We also have a concept of templates in the system that I could pick like templates that will go ahead and default accounts for me. So if I were to go ahead and update this, you'll see the accounts are going to change based on what's configured for the maintenance template, and then I could submit it. But all of those, again, are just different options on how you want to process it. So now it's gone to repairs and maintenance, and I'll go ahead and submit that one. So I'm going to kick off a few here, just for the sake of having a lot of examples, because more examples are better than fewer, I suppose. Let's go ahead and pick a template on this. We'll go ahead and assign this to office supplies. And that looks all right, I suppose. So let's go ahead. Oh, we need to pick a vendor for this one. Looks like my template did not have one. The vendors, by the way, are querying Business Central directly. So that is why you'll see it did look them up. We're not maintaining vendors or anything like that. Oops, I should have updated. That's also being flagged as a duplicate. So I guess I could have updated that one as well, but that's okay. I think we have, we'll submit one more. So let's say, I think we have enough, but I want to show you different options with the approval as well. Okay, I'm going to change hats to be an approver, but before I do that, I want to show you what's being captured on these invoices. So I'm going to go to this audit tab here. And what you're going to see is sort of the history of this invoice. You're going to see when it was created, how it got created, was it automatically created by a template, etc. And then you're going to see who submitted it, which was me, and then it went to under review and who is pending who got assigned the review task. And like I said, for my sake, I have to be everyone, so it's not that exciting. You just see my DynamicPoint demo account on all aspects here. But obviously for a real implementation, it would go to a manager or someone different than me. So the audit log is capturing everyone, but now I'm going to move forward, still staying within that processing step that we just talked about, but I'm going to pretend to be this person over here now, the manager. So I'm changing my hat again. And their concern in life is reviewing these invoices and approving them. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my email here. And what you're going to see is several email notifications have been generated for me submitting those 3 invoices that you just saw me submit. And you can see pretty obviously that this is being generated by Microsoft's workflow, aka Power Automate. And if I were to go into this, I'm going to see some details on the invoice that have been included on the notification. I'll see the invoice itself, of course, is being shared, right, or attached to that. And then I could see the ability to approve or reject it right from the email. Sometimes that's all reviewers do in this world, right? They just approve or reject, they get the invoice and they're here to say yay or nay. Other times, reviewers have to help me code an invoice. Maybe they have to help me pick the PO it's applicable for. Maybe they have to help me assign a dimension like a department or account, etc. Because accounts payable doesn't know until it goes to the manager who defines that data. So I've also included on this email notification a link. And that link is going to drive me back to a review page that applies my permissions and gives me the ability to edit maybe certain things or maybe all things, right? So this user has pretty high privileges. They could assign a template, they could edit dimensions and accounts and everything else, and then they could go ahead and save it. Sometimes that, like I said, is required because the reviewer is actually helping me code it, and other times they are just approving it. In any regard, I could always approve it from this email and say, this looks good, and submit it. So that was from email. The sort of magic behind these Power Automate approval actions is they are highly integrated with a lot of aspects of Microsoft and Office 365. So if I were to say, go to Teams, because we wanted to talk about Teams, right? And look at my activity feed, you're going to see all those invoice notifications also appear in my notifications or in my activity feed. And it's a similar experience, right? I have the edit, I got the attachment. This is the one I just completed. So you can see, actually, I can't do anything on that. But if I were to go to the next one, you can see here I have the approve or reject. In fact, I have other actions here like follow up and reassign and do different things to this. So I could say this is approved. And then I got one more, and then we'll ultimately reject this one just for the fun of it. So in addition to Teams also has, in addition to the activity feed on Teams also has an approval app that would show me all of these items as well. So if I were to go here, I see that same list and I see all of the ones that are, quote unquote, assigned to me. I could say I approved all of them, but I left one open. And for those who are more mobile centric, you better believe there's an app for your phone too, right? So I could go to my Power Automate app on my phone, go to my activity here, go look at my approvals. Here's all my open ones, and do that same type of functionality from my mobile device as well. Teams also has mobile app, and you could do it there as well, right? You have a lot of options. So let's go into this last one and let's reject it and say this is too much and not approved. And we'll reject it. Okay, so now I have different invoices. They've been reviewed by the manager. The workflow is configured based off the department that was assigned. It could, of course, continue for more stages in the workflow, but I kept mine really simple and I only have a single stage of approval. So let's go ahead and refresh here. And what you'll see is 2 of my invoices are gone. They're not really gone, they're just being filtered out. So I could go ahead and clear my filter here. 1 was rejected and then 2 got submitted. And what submitted means to us is that it got through the final approval and we have created that purchase invoice in the world of Business Central automatically. So all of these, so let's go look at the rejected one. Rejected one, if I go look at the audit, of course I'm gonna have who rejected it, the time and date stamp associated with that. If I go look at the notes, hopefully they gave me some details on why they rejected it. I could obviously reapprove this, I could change things. Now it is ready to be either amended or submitted again for workflow. The other ones did go to a submitted state. So if I look at the audit logs on those, it's going to be a little bit different as opposed to being rejected. It was approved. The notes I just entered was, I guess a little bit more, friendly than it being rejected. I just put it looks good to have a comment in there. And then the last tab you see here is the ERP details of the transaction that got created in the world of BC. So for the sake of showing this all the way through, we're going to open our friend Business Central here, and we are going to search on purchase invoices. Purchase invoices. And we are going to look for that one that I happen to copy and paste the number on and open it. So what occurred is upon the last step in the approval process, the invoice was created automatically. And all of the, of course, GL account assignments and dimensions, if you're using jobs and everything else, would have come over and are now represented on these items on the purchase invoice. In addition, we've actually put a link to drill back into that as well. So this link will actually open up either the invoice or the review page, depending on your configuration. So mine, I believe, is going to take me to the review page. So I have access to not only the invoice itself, but as well as the audits and things of that nature. So as you can see, it automatically created that transaction. In this case, it's in a non-posted state, but if you want to have it come in as posted, that is an option as well, such that you don't even have to review it after it has been integrated with BC. All right, so let's go back and again revisit the process that we were talking about and do a quick recap. So the steps we went through, we talked about the invoice receipt, we talked about the processing workflow, and lastly, we talked about the accounting integration and bringing that transaction in after it was final approved. So that was the sort of full scope of what we wanted to go through. Now I'm going to shift a little bit and talk about the technology that was in play here. The beauty of a lot of this stuff is that since we are using this Office 365 framework, even if you don't want to use our app or whatever else, which is fine, right? Obviously our app is adding a lot as far as the integration with BC, but you could use these tools to automate an otherwise potentially manually process using, again, just this Office 365 suite. So the first thing that I wanted to focus on is how we receive this email and how it ended up in SharePoint, right? And the reason I put it in the SharePoint is because I don't want these invoices just floating around in inboxes. I want a central repository for them. And the glue that's going to hold this whole thing together is going to be Power Automate. And it is a really simple workflow that I am willing to share with everyone here. And I'm going to go to it. And here it is. It's pretty doggone simple. On new email, so this is using Power Automate, I am monitoring a specific folder, which I call Business Central AP Automation. And it is essentially taking that attachment and adding it to the library. Simple as that, right? So it came in via email and it got added to the library. Now, is there more I could do here? Absolutely, right? What if this is not a legitimate invoice? What if someone sent me a statement? What if someone sent me junk? I should probably put some more processing logic in here to check things on that email to see if it is legitimate from a accounts payable perspective, right? But as you can see, the general workflow is pretty basic. You know, I get an email in, I add it to SharePoint. And by me adding it to SharePoint, it now has a home for it. And the reason I want this home for it is so I can move on to this next step, which is using OCR to extrapolate data for it. Right, so our sort of next tip is by using this repository of this document library, I can now use a myriad of OCR devices or systems, including Microsoft AI, that integrate or can be called from a SharePoint library. So the first step is I obviously got the invoice into the library, but now I want to get data out of it. So let's go ahead and look at that workflow. So pretty simple. When that file was created in SharePoint, so this is the first step in the workflow. I happen to send myself a mobile notification, so no big deal there. But what happened is we obtained those file properties and got the data from the file, and then we uploaded it to OCR. OCR could be different systems, and this one, as you could see, it's actually making a call to a tool by the name of Verify. It's a tool that we use quite a bit. It's a great OCR tool. I could show you how to test it out if you'd like. It's pretty simple, but that could be AI Builder. It could be on-premise OCR. There's all these cloud services that give us the ability to submit a document and they perform OCR and give us the results. And after we get those results, they go right back into the library. So if you notice when I was doing my demonstration, those invoices were submitted and then you saw all of the data be populated. And what we're using, right, our automation or our glue behind all of this is that Power Automate workflow that is looking for those invoices regardless of how they get submitted and taking that and submitting OCR. In just those two steps alone, you could see how, you know, I haven't bought any product, I'm just using what I own, and I could put a lot of more structure to my AP process as opposed to just sending them in emails and using Outlook to manage it, right? Now I have a central repository and I have a home for this data, and then I could begin using that to kick off workflows and things like that for approval. So that was everything I think I had from a demonstration perspective. Let's go ahead and back to a couple slides before we close this out. So, you know, people ask me, why do you do it this way, right? And I found this interesting slide called the biarchy. If you're familiar with the hierarchy of needs, it's the biarchy of needs, right? And the gist here is that, you know, as you go up in this pyramid, if you're familiar with the hierarchy of needs, it sort of starts with shelter, and then at the top is my ego, and me driving around in a cool car or whatever, and at the bottom is making sure I have food and water, right? As you move up this pyramid, your costs, of course, increase, right? Like for invoice automation, the fancier system I have and whatever else, I could sort of go around with these, bragging rights and say, well, we bought this and it's the greatest thing, whatever. On the cheaper cost or the more efficient is using what you already own, right? And that is really our goal here is all of us, right? Us, DynamicPoint included, have Office 365 subscriptions. And it comes with most everything that we've talked about today, right? We even developed an app that sort of helps glue that together, but even without our app, there's a lot of benefit that could be had by just using these tools and applying the automation that they offer. So that is the goal. And then the last thing that I wanted to show was that if I go to our vendor portal, so I'm going to go ahead and get out of this. And I actually have our vendor portal open, which guess what is going to use where did I put it? Okay, our vendor portal is using Office 365 SharePoint again, but in this case, it's another site that's more targeted towards vendors, right? So this is an internal processing one. This is more if I want to share that same information with vendors. And if I click on any of this, it's really just a SharePoint site that's been shared externally. They're going to be able to see their data in a real-time fashion, right? So a vendor could go look at their purchase orders. Maybe I want them to interact with this detail and acknowledge it or update their expected receipt date. So they can interact with this information as well as, submit documentation and upload attachments. Or maybe I want them to go ahead and print certain things like a PO and generate their own reports. By clicking that print button, we're actually calling the Business Central report and dynamically rendering it in the portal. So as we've been talking about, it's been a home for AP automation, but I could also use this as a home for vendors to come check their statuses on things or integrate with POs or upload attachments or manage contracts, look at open and historical invoices, et cetera, that I wouldn't, otherwise have to interact with them. It's all now at their fingertips and they could get this information whenever they want. So that's the last part of tying this all together, is looking at it not only from an internal perspective, but maybe I want to open up that window to my vendors and give them an updated status on how things are going in a real-time fashion. So thank you for bearing with me. I will go ahead and put up our information, and I will go ahead and turn it back to sa.global if you guys want to go ahead and close it out. But otherwise, thank you everyone so much for your time.
Awesome, Mike. I tell you, every time I see the solutions here, I just get more and more impressed. So appreciate all the effort that you put into this. I think as we've worked together on other projects, some things I wanted to sort of add to the discussion here around, all of the options that you provided aren't intended to be overwhelming, but more so just what the preference of the end user might be, where they want to work, whether that's email / Outlook or in Teams or a mobile app or a web form, right? There's all of these options for submitting and approving these invoices, which I think is just more of the power of your platform. But also, any modifications that we might need to make on the Business Central side, the DynamicPoint solutions are able to absorb those and utilize those custom modifications. So again, just more of the power for what you all can bring to the table. So
yeah, I think you make a fair point there, right? I tell people sort of, the cliche is the good thing about our product or this approach is you have a lot of options. The bad thing about this is you have a lot of options, right? Because you sort of have to zone in on the ones that are applicable for your business, and then the rest is just noise. It's not providing any value. So today was obviously trying to give an overview of those, but obviously the ones that apply to a given business scenario should be the focus and not everything else.
Absolutely. Well,
Mhm.
again, thank you, Mike. Thank you, everybody, for attending, and certainly reach out to continue the dialogue. We are here to answer questions or discuss how these solutions might be used by your organization. So we will close this up and appreciate the time, everyone.
Yep. Have a great day.